Hi, I'm Tim Flanagan here with Amanda Kramer on another episode of Winning Through Culture. Today, we're going to spend some time focusing on conversations that can be had with your employees and your clients, for that matter, to understand the type of culture you have, to inform you of where you stand, and to get insights and ideas on how you can move that culture more towards where you would like to be. As a part of our series for this first part of 2022, we are talking about some of the elements of laying a foundation. And these conversations, Amanda, I think you'll agree, are a really important part of that.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter if it is the first time you're thinking about having an assessment of your culture or doing a listening tour, or it's something that you do on a consistent basis, or you have a team of people who are having conversations on your behalf and bringing that information back to you. They absolutely need to be happening and absolutely need to be cataloged and themed in some way, shape, or form.
So why don't we jump in and talk about the process that we have followed. And we'll start with our teammates and our employees. What is the way in which we went about these conversations? And it's not a one-time deal. We will certainly speak to that. But I do think it's important, kind of the setup of the conversations, what is to be shared and what is to be shared and kept confidential, and just kind of the whole construct. Because again, you in your role, in our organization at least, well, you wear many hats, but the particular hat you wear when it comes to these culture conversations is not an HR hat. It's not a human resources, tell us how we're doing hat. It's a relationship of trust. So I definitely think how you go about these and the setup, I think, is real important, so people can get a sense as to how, if they choose to embark on this part of building out their culture intentionally, should go about it the right way.
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about how it really started is we instituted, and if you don't have this already or you have some semblance of it, is just a monthly staff and associate meeting. So we'll talk about that lens first. And that was where we were asking for open dialogue and feedback and sharing with them just generally what's going on in the organization, inviting our employees, so to speak, into the dialogue that we were having as a leadership and as a senior leadership team. And that is really the platform in which I introduced having what I call culture conversations. I don't call them assessments or a listening tour or whatever. I just say, I want to sit down with you. And I always start with, I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I mean it. And I think that from a perspective of me not being in a direct supervision or manager role for these individuals, it lends itself to the accessibility of me and also the ability for them to feel as though they can actually share it. And there won't be any repercussions or what have you if they share something that isn't in the not so great category. Of course, I'll take it if you want to say how wonderful we are, but I really want to hear honest feedback. So level setting what the conversation was going to look like in a group format first, so everybody could hear the exact same thing. And then following up with, I want to get off site. I don't want to do it in my office or in your space. Let's go get coffee, lunch, a drink, whatever it is that will make that person feel the most comfortable, just to have a dialogue around really it's start, stop, and continue, which is not a new concept in any way, shape, or form, but really talking through what they find as value in the organization, where we can improve, where I can improve in supporting them as a dialogue, but also the fact that everything they tell me, I'm never going to sit down with the greater leadership team and say, so-and-so said X, Y, and Z. It's thematic. I pull the trends from all the conversations that I have over a yearly basis and have dialogue on what we can do. And there's going to be some things that we're unable to do. And I think the concept of just being really upfront about that is most important as you're starting to have these conversations.
Do you remember the first time you did them and kind of what the experience was like?
Absolutely. That's kind of funny. So yes, the very first time I did it, it was one of those things where people felt like they needed to tell me how great we were.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, that's wonderful. And then you really have to pull them into the conversation. So I did develop some questions just to kind of work through. And again, these are not necessarily tried and true, not something that you have to do exactly the way that I would, but I talk a lot about how a joyful or impactful work environment, what that means to them and what that looks like. Because that tells me a lot about what they value in an organization without them feeling like they're giving the organization praise or they're telling me something that we could be doing better. They're simply just sharing with me their opinion, which is a really great way to invite them into the conversation to begin with. And then I kind of move into the dialogue of, okay, so when, again, this would have been pre-COVID. So when you were driving into the office, because now everybody has your remote work opportunity, et cetera. But when you were traveling into the office each day, what were the things that you look forward to? And that really helps them switch from, maybe a feedback conversation to she really wants to hear
a little more reflective.
Exactly. Like what I think about when I'm headed to the office. And so just making sure that when you're in those initial conversations, when I first started, phrasing it in a way where they're just kind of sharing their opinion, their reflections, really led to extremely fruitful dialogues. However, 2 years later, now I'm really getting the part where they'll tell me in the very beginning, hey, we should do this differently. So it's definitely has built over time. And again, it's that trust conversation. It's them getting familiar, them feeling like they can share their opinions and then ultimately share their feedback.
Well, and I think thematically, to your point, there were some things in your early conversations maybe that were a little cringeworthy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Again, that's part of what I wanted to accentuate in this conversation is there's a vulnerability on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to start asking people about their experience in your culture, as famous saying I've had is, not mine, but a friend of mine, cover your belly button because it might hurt. And I think that's one thing to recognize. And you said it, Amanda, is this is not an attempt to go out and get pat on the back and be told how great everything is or how great a job you're doing. And I mean, collectively as an organization, that's the you.
Well, you're dealing with people and a range of emotions, and everybody's going to be at a different point in that kind of spectrum as you're thinking through whether they want to tell you the good, the bad, or the ugly. But at the same time, you probably will hear things that you weren't prepared for. At least I know that I did. And they were people related, but they were also process related. It was kind of like I got hit with the gamut of things. And I'm sitting there going, okay, how am I going to take this feedback and have a dialogue that can be productive and at the end of the day be able to do something with it. And that is what has evolved over the time in which I've been doing them, because now I know that from a standpoint of just level setting expectations, I start every conversation, even if I've had 6 conversations with the same person over these last couple of years, I say, there are going to be things I'm going to be able to take away and we can do something about it. And there are going to be things that maybe I can do something about it, but it's going to take some time. And then there are some things that I'm probably not going to be able to do anything about. And I'm going to be upfront honest with you of where things fall in those categories. And if there is a situation that comes up where it is more people related, which is a lot of what I was dealing with in the beginning, people weren't maybe as satisfied with their manager's style or whatever that might have looked like. I wasn't, of course, going to take that away and say, we need to have a conversation about how you're managing this person. It was more, let's collectively talk about how we incorporate the values of the organization to better reflect how we all have our own leadership styles and helping people come to that conversation together where they both felt comfortable enough to have that dialogue versus me being that kind of mediator in the in-between. So when you first start out on these, don't expect it's going to be rainbows and hugs and kisses, because you will get the feedback. But it's more important that at the end of the day, you're able to, as I said, kind of catalog it and say thematically, here's some areas that we need to improve on. And maybe it is something from a manager style or a leadership style, like a training opportunity for an entire group that needs to be done, and really think through how you can break it into like almost levels of priority and say, okay, we can definitely tackle this quickly, or this is going to be in our 5-year plan of how we can evolve our leadership and ultimately the culture of the organization.
I know you asked the same set of questions to all parties, and that gave you kind of a baseline, if you will, of responses. And I know the confidentiality component of this was really important to you. I am let's solve the problem type personality.
Yes.
And you were very good about only sharing themes and not sharing specifics, as you mentioned. Are there things that jump out at you? Obviously, there may have been some low-hanging fruit, kind of easy wins. And then there were some things that were going to take more time. You mentioned specifically, maybe stylistically, working relationship or management style. What's jumped out over the last several months at you that has helped? Because I think the key thing is people understand that this wasn't just a conversation that went nowhere.
Right. It definitely has gone somewhere. And some of the things to think about just in any working environment, whether it was pre-COVID, during COVID, or post-COVID, is the benefit platform that you're able to offer to your employees and associates. Just that there's a review of that, getting feedback from those that are accessing what's available to them and making sure that if there are some enhancements you could make, or maybe they all love it and that's great. But that is something easy to ask, to say, how do you use the benefit plan? Does it work for you? Are there any considerations that you would like to see us make or do something a little bit differently? And that is something that you can then go and take to your HR team and say, hey, I'm hearing some feedback that maybe we could look at our benefits and do something a little bit differently. And that is a conversation that absolutely can happen. That is something that we did, which was, again, that kind of low-hanging fruit, which our HR team was 100% on board with and did a lot of research and was able to come back with some different offerings that enhance not only the medical and dental and all those fun things, but that more lifestyle component of the benefit offering, which I think was really great. Other things that have come that are in that low-hanging fruit kind of category was, can we get back together? And again, this is a COVID conversation, but can we get back together and just have our quarterly staff outing again? Can we do that again?
Can we do that live?
Can we do that live? Can we get those back on the books? Absolutely. That's something I can instantly take care of and get those back on the books. It's small things like that have been illuminated. Some people really need that interaction and that platform to be able to provide that feedback. And then you have the conversation of, again, as I mentioned, that longer tail of managerial style, leadership development, coaching conversations. But one of the things that came from the dialogue I've been having over the last several years, and you mentioned it earlier in one of our episodes, but our emerging leaders program, actually having a guide path when an individual comes into the organization to develop those leadership skills with a curriculum. And there was somebody in our organization, Amy, who was really passionate about that. So she and I had a conversation. She built a program, and now we've graduated 2 classes from it. And the third one is already ongoing. So it's one of those things where there's definitely opportunities that you can take and grab hold of and make happen instantly, or instantly in a sense of in a couple of months. And then you have the things that are going to have a longer tail, but you're constantly going back and having that dialogue to say, okay, we did this. We couldn't do that yet. What else is on your mind? How can we make working here, being part of our community and our family, again, making us a best place to work, whether it's recognized by the Charlotte Business Journal or not? At the end of the day, I want to make sure that what we're providing to our associates, they feel like they have a best place to work.
Well, and that is congruent with everything we said we would be about culturally.
That's right.
The words are hollow when not backed up by substance. So do you think that it makes sense to share the questions in the show notes for this particular
absolutely.
episode specific to? Okay.
Yeah. And it's a short set that I stick to. Again, it's a lot more about where they are, their opinions, their feedback. And it is going to be on the, what can we start, stop, and continue? That's really what I focus on, is going to be those things that they think we should be doing differently or better, or maybe it's great and they want to see us continue it. So having that dialogue is really important. Happy to share them out.
Well, I know these conversations are an ongoing thing. It's not just a once and done.
Correct.
So that's another element of this model that I think is important to accentuate, is that it's not a one-time discussion.
No, and I'll have as many culture conversations as they want to in a year. I encourage that we have at least one a year. I would love if we have at least semi-annual, so 2. And then sometimes people just come and sit down in my office. They're like, can we have a culture conversation? Absolutely. Happy to do that. But again, I think the delineation that I'm not HR, I'm not seen in that line of a role in the organization really does help. And that's something that I would encourage from a small business owner or an entrepreneur, or even if you're a team leader or whatever it looks like, make sure that you have a trusted, for lack of a better term to say, third party that can have these dialogues, because there is that confidentiality component to it, that when you have a person, or rather a role like mine in the organization, they have seen the glide path and the ability to say, okay, when I share something, something seems to happen. It doesn't seem like it gets put in my file and put in a drawer. And that's really important. You really have to do something with the feedback that you're given, or at least go back to them and say, hey, it's not something we can do right now, but I still have it on my radar. We'll revisit next year. But I do think it's important that as the small business owner or the entrepreneur, that it's not you having the dialogue, because that can be very intimidating for the associates or the employees that you have. So even if you need to have that person on the side that's having those dialogues, you can identify somebody, even if culture is not their primary responsibility. It's definitely an opportunity to engage someone else in your organization.
Yeah, I think it's key that it be someone that people trust, feel safe with. You've obviously built credibility in your relationships by keeping confidence, and at the same time by taking the themes and seeing to it that there were changes made,
right,
that people could tangibly see and point to. And I think that's another really important component here is, have it not be the business owner, have it not be someone in a position of authority over that individual.
Correct.
Honor any vulnerability you get, and don't try and coerce it out of people if you don't get it, because that's not going to be very productive either. That won't build too much trust. And it's an evolutionary process. Again, a series of conversations over a period of time. You've been doing this now for a couple of years. And, I think it's a very rich experience to overall enhance experience your employees have in your culture and your organization. I know one of the questions that you have asked is, what keeps you here, or may have prompted you to consider making a change. Again, pretty vulnerable question, pretty tough one to maybe hear an answer to if somebody's saying, you know what, I'm thinking about making a change for these reasons.
Sometimes you get a very specific example that you have to do something with. So just be prepared for that when you ask that question.
And do it in a confidential way. So I think that's a really important approach to, again, engaging with your employees and creating a winning culture. Now, we've taken this idea, I want to put a little twist on this. We've developed familiarity and a comfort level with these discussions, and they've been able to inform us in how to, again, make the organization stronger for our people. Well, we've took the idea one step further. And that step further, which again may or may not be appropriate for some businesses, to talk to their clients, their customers. And for us, our clients are our advisors. So let's talk a little bit, Amanda, about how this same concept can be taken to a client-customer relationship.
Absolutely. So when you start to engage from a client relationship standpoint, when it comes down to your culture, it's really about what value they see in your organization. So how are they taking the tools and resources that are provided to them and then making those accessible for the growth of whether it's their practice or just their professional development, whatever that might look like. And so in the construct of taking it to your clients, we had an opportunity to really dig a little bit deeper, again, about the value that they felt the organization brought to them, what they are most excited and engaged about in having a business partner, i.e. the firm in this situation. And then we were able to have really great dialogue about how we effectively communicate and engage with them. And it was some of the most fruitful discussion I think I've had in a long time in a very structured way. There is this accessibility component that you definitely need to make sure is there. And when you talk about having culture conversations or dialogues with your clients, you are going to hear, again, as we kind of shared, you're going to hear what is going well, what is not going so well, and then ultimately how you can move your organization forward and support them. So I think one of the really cool things that came from how we transitioned those questions to a more client-facing opportunity was that engagement component, what they most look forward to in a business partner. I don't know if you want to share any of the specific examples we got, because that was...
Well, and again, it was insightful because some of the things that I thought in a relationship where you're providing, again, as a business, in essence, providing a service to a client, I will say I had a presumption about what people saw and found value in. And I had some very surprising, positive, but surprising answers from a couple of our advisors. And it was important for me to understand that what I thought they found value in was important to them, but what they really found value in was something that in a couple of instances I just would not have even thought of, quite
Right.
frankly. And that it gave me an insight to a certain extent into how they think, but also where to apply our time and attention in those relationships.
Right.
So that to me was very insightful. There were other situations where I felt like, boy, we're providing great value to this person, and they didn't necessarily see it the same way. They valued the relationship, but they didn't think that what we were doing on their behalf or what we thought was important to them was all that important. And their definition of success, in essence, was very different.
Well, in the conversation, the employee versus the client, right? The culture that you've built or you are building, again, it's an evolution. It should bleed no matter who you're talking to. And so it is very imperative that if you are going to be in the marketplace, that you have both lenses. Because from an employee perspective, you could be doing all of the right things and getting all of this feedback. And then from a client perspective, if you don't go to them and ask, they're the ones that are in market. And again, I'm hopeful that you're getting referrals from these people and all of these fun things that you are putting out there the same. You're consistent in the experience that you're delivering for those that you employ, and also the experience to those that at the end of the day are the lifeline of your business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, again, that experience, those conversations, and that's really just a one-time thing we've done, not with all of our advisors, clients, because it wasn't feasible at the time, but it did inform us to take a very different approach as we finished 2021 in the business planning process with our advisors, which quite frankly, I was probably on the first day of those meetings saying, how come we didn't do this for the last 10 years?
We heard what they said and we made a change.
Yes.
And we did it to the best of our ability, and it was really quite great. And at the same time, I learned a lot through that process. So we're going to do it a little bit differently in 2022 when we get to that point. But
well, we do need to build some breaks in between the meetings.
We do.
Yes,
we do. We do like to run hard. That is something we've learned.
Full speed. No, in all seriousness, those conversations led us to an entirely different approach to helping our advisors plan their 2022 and beyond. Led to some really rich conversations. It gave us feedback to bring more people into those conversations, which again, I would put in the category glaring glimpse of the obvious. But when you get locked into doing things a certain way, you just kind of can get locked into doing things a certain way. And by making the change we made, we brought a lot of new members of our team into the conversation. And it just was really rich. And it showed that, again, we were listening because a lot of the advisors had suggested a different format, and that ultimately we got a lot more out of that and are going to be much better positioned to help those advisors, again, our clients, be successful. So my encouragement is, as a business owner, tackle your employees first. They show up for a career, a job, an opportunity, and it's important that you provide a wonderful environment for them, but do not lose sight of your clients, because they are the reason the business exists, is to serve them. And it's through those client relationships that you have the economics to be able to pay your employees. So there's a symbiotic relationship here of paying attention to being intentional about your culture of how you show up with both parties.
Well, and it's this concept, right, of empowerment, and that every individual that's part of your organization, or is what we like to call our part of our community, has a voice. And you're hearing that and you're taking it in stride from a standpoint of the feedback that they're providing to you. Again, it's the same experience with an employee culture conversation as it is with a client culture conversation, to say there are some things we're going to be able to take what you're sharing with us and do something about. There are some things that there's going to have a longer tail on it. And then there are some things that I don't know if we're ever going to get to, but I hear you. And at least I'm cataloging that and having that as part of a lens in which I'm looking at the decisions we're making at an organizational level, because we've made some pivots and some shifts because of those conversations that otherwise we would not have had if you and I hadn't sat down and said, we're literally going to take 45 minutes to an hour and have XYZ conversations with so many of our associates as well as our clients, and then catalog all of that and bring it back. I mean, it's definitely a time commitment, but something that is very valuable and worth it, honestly.
Yeah, the investment of the time was extremely valuable. They were really great conversations to have. And again, the work that's coming out of them at this point is also extremely valuable.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, we hope that these, as we'll share them in the show notes, these conversation starters is what I'll call them, not necessarily just questions. We hope that you'll be able to use them in some dialogues that you have upcoming this year. And as we have continued to share on these episodes in this first quarter of the year, we hope that this content helps you stay impactful and relevant. And
have your culture conversations. So again, thank you everybody for being with us on Winning Through Culture. Thank you very much, Amanda. Until we are together again, be well.